Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to The Money Factor, our program that focuses on local business and personal finance topics. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. In 2005, the town of Colonie adopted a new comprehensive plan. Following that up, a new zoning or land use law was created and has just been finished. Our guests today are Kevin DeLaughter and Kelly Mateja from the town Planning and Economic Development Department. We're going to be discussing the land use law and what it might mean to us. I want to welcome you to the show, Kevin and Kelly.
Thank you for having us.
And I guess a good place to start would be, we started with a comprehensive plan. How does that tie in exactly with the next step?
Well, I think when you're talking about the issues that we talked about in the comprehensive plan, we were talking about what do people want their town to look like in 20 years. And by that we mean, what kind of streets do you want to drive on? How do you want to get around the town? How do you envision living your life in this town? And one of the first steps that we laid out to implement what we heard in the comp plan was our new land use law that we've just rolled out and had adopted. And so when we were creating the land use law, it took about a year. And that was after the 2 years that we put into the comprehensive plan. And every decision that we were making about which laws to tweak and which zones to pull in were based on the feedback that we got throughout the comprehensive planning process. The surveys, the community meetings, a very intense 2-year period of listening to residents and business people saying, this is where we want to go. And the land use law is our first step to help get us there.
It sounds like a pretty difficult thing to take a lot of feedback, create a plan that's based on what exists now, and try to envision how you would create something which would get you somewhere else when we're talking about real estate and people's purchases and what they already own and grandfathered clauses. And
Right.
how do you approach a plan, or how do you approach land development laws with that in mind?
It's one of those situations you can't make everybody happy, because obviously you have property owners' rights and then you have the needs of a community coming into play, and so it's a lot of balance. It's trying to figure out what makes sense in this context. And when we were doing the comprehensive plan, people said things like, we want to see more natural spaces in Colonie. You know, we want our children to be safe to walk to school. We want to be able to have more of a downtown feeling in our commercial areas where you can actually walk from maybe the coffee shop to the pharmacy. These were things that you can't necessarily in all instances across the town do, and they may not be things that you're able to do in 20 years. But I think to get us to that place where you're balancing, you have to look at what's being done elsewhere and then see how does it fit here and how might it fit in the future. So
yeah, I'd say we definitely have a town that's substantially built out in a lot of areas, and that there is a pattern of development that's been established over the last 50 years particularly, and a lot of the new law is substantially different from the way things have happened in the past, and it will be a long transition period to get to where we want to end up.
I think it's a fascinating subject. It's something like, if I could take an area and think of anything that I would like a way to have more recreation. I would like trees. I would like access to water. I would like to cut down on energy use. And all these things are so fascinating, but I have to applaud you for managing to pull all this together. Maybe when we talk about the whole plan, I think people might have a hard time, like I have, reading over the document to prepare. These areas all have initials that you guys are very familiar with. You talk about maybe a COR or a COF, or I don't know. An H stands for something else. Could you just kind of go over the areas a little bit with us, what there was and what might be new?
We used to have something like 22 zones in the town of Colonie.
Roughly?
Roughly 22 zones.
Different zones.
Different zones.
Wow.
Well, not entirely different. We would have a residential A and a residential A1 and a residential A2, and the differences were so slight. They would be 16,000 square feet per lot versus 18,000 square feet per lot. And really, what does that mean? And when we were looking at that, we decided we would condense all of our single-family residential into one SFR zone, the single-family residential zone.
SFR, okay.
SFR. So if you lived in a single-family residential zone before, be it an A, A2, A4, you're in the SFR now.
Okay.
And same thing for multifamily residential, our MFR. We had B, B1, B2, C. It just didn't make any sense to have everything so spread out. So we condensed those down into single-family residential, multifamily residential. But when you started looking at our commercial corridors, things got a little more tricky. One of the things we heard in the comp plan is that people would like more mixed use, more flexibility with what uses are allowed in the zones. So if you look at Central Avenue, we have a business E or a business E2, and we tried to figure out where in our commercial areas it's appropriate to have a core, a commercial office residential.
Commercial office, okay.
Yes.
All these things are difficult.
Well, and we don't just have the core, we have the H core, the highway commercial office residential, which is a larger scale, which would accommodate more big box areas such
Okay.
as Latham Retail or Latham Farms. Then you have our core, which I had mentioned earlier, which would be most of, the Miracle Mile on Route 9 or lower Central Avenue. No, Upper Central Avenue. Sorry, I got that confused. From the Village to
Okay.
Schenectady. And you have our N-Core, which is our neighborhood commercial office residential, which scales it down a little bit, smaller sized buildings, and that's meant to be more of neighborhood gathering places where you can walk from adjacent residential areas to go get a cup of coffee, pick up your newspaper, see your doctor, things that really are a neighborhood village type feel. So those are our main mixed-use
Now that
zones.
last one sounds a little bit like old-style Main Street, maybe getting back to people living in an area and being able to do a lot of the things that they want to do in that area.
That's really the intent. It's a neighborhood-oriented, walkable community. That's really the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's probably of interest to people. So how many zones are there now?
I think
12?
we ended up with about 12, right? In addition to the multifamily and single-family residential and the mixed use, the core, the H core, and the N core. We have an airport business area district that is centered, obviously enough, on the airport. That's pretty much a light industrial characterization. We have an industrial district that is a more heavy industrial use, which is our least restrictive zoning district. There is a land conservation district that encompasses many of the open spaces in town that are currently either under town ownership or some other governmental
So
or
a park might
not-for-profit
be
agency.
in that. What would the town park be in?
The town park along the Mohawk is in the land conservation district. The Crossings is in the land conservation district. Many of the areas in the Pine Bush that are under town ownership, state ownership, Nature Conservancy have been included in that land conservation district where the uses are very limited as far as what's permitted.
Now I noticed when I was looking through, there seemed to be an area, I don't know the initials, but it had to do with being able to be flexible. You didn't mention that yet, did you?
No, that would be, I think you're referring to the Planned Development District,
Right.
Or PDD. That's something that requires a specific application to the town board for a rezoning. The applicant could come in with a given piece of property and a specific mix of uses, type of building,
So this
and
would be
project
for
layout.
a larger area.
Generally, it would be for a larger area. There is no minimum lot size required for that application,
Okay.
but it typically applies to larger areas. And As I said, the applicant basically comes in with a conceptual development plan with the layout and mix of uses that they intend. If the planning board recommends in favor of that and the town board adopts a rezoning, that rezoning locks in the application and the range of uses and the actual physical layout.
So
of
it kind of
development.
allows things to happen that you don't really foresee because you don't know what somebody's going to come up with. The town can't put in $1 million to develop this neighborhood, but somebody else can have a commercial idea of how it could be done. And then you can say, yes, that's good.
Exactly. It's really intended to allow the flexibility for situations that we couldn't foresee. And we're looking for those projects to have some benefit to the town as well, whether it's a better mix of housing stock, something that might not be available under our conventional zoning. It may be set aside of an area of open space, some kind of benefit that the town might not otherwise get with the conventional zoning.
Maybe we could go a little more with the conservation zone, and then we'll move on to some of the other ones. Maybe you could either describe more about a conservation zone, or if that seems like not a very interesting question, you could take a look more about how do you do borders? Okay, I understand the town park. Nobody's going to put anything in there. They're not going to build a 2-story office building or a house or anything. So what does that mean in terms of the area around there? I assume that's what it's about.
Well, I think we have a land conservation zone, and then we also have a conservation development design overlay district, which is, if you look at our zoning map, it's an area outlined in green, and there's a big portion around the Pine Bush area.
And we can put that up on the screen.
Yep. We also have one up along the Mohawk River. One is out in the Bout area, and then by Anley Pond, around the Shaker Historical area, we have a conservation overlay, and out by the Denison-Bly Road areas. And these are very interesting zones because they don't necessarily change the zoning underneath, but what they allow for is if we had a subdivision, someone wanted to do a subdivision in the conservation design overlay.
Okay.
They would be required to come in with a plan that takes out all of the constrained area. And I mean, we're a pretty built up town. What we've got left have a lot of constrained areas. We have wetlands, federal and state, steep slopes, protected water courses and their boundary. So we say, look, they're off the table. You can't develop that. And we don't want you to include that in your open space. We do a density calculation based on whatever is left over, and then they have to put that density on 60% of the remaining unconstrained land.
Okay.
So you have smaller lots, but you're saving so much more natural space and open space, and that allows you to do further buffering of the wetlands and of our protected water courses, which are critical environmental areas that deserve protection. So this really, I think, is a great step forward for the town of Colonie in protecting our last open spaces and natural spaces.
The people that are interested in that the most, we should all be interested in it, but are the people in that area that live right around the parks the most interested in this, or is it pretty much town-wide when you talk about the conservation districts?
Well, the conservation development overlay is not the parks per se. I mean, basically,
how big are those?
Generally they're applied to some of the areas of town where we have large undeveloped tracts that are available for development.
Think of the Pine Bush.
And I see.
Many of those areas do have these environmental constraints
I see.
where we have an interest in protecting and preserving those environmental features. So that was the reason for the conservation development overlay district. The land conservation district is the one that is applied to the town parks and other properties that are generally under public ownership.
Okay.
And those are really more a recognition of the existing status of those properties as lands that have been set aside already for open space purposes. That designation doesn't really have much of an impact on the adjacent properties, other than that those people know that there is property next to them that in most cases will not be developed.
And that's an issue that we see across the town, is that whenever we have a big proposal coming in for a subdivision or another sort of development, is that people say, I thought that was going to be forever wild. My realtor told me nothing could ever happen on that because of the wetlands or for whatever reason. And that's not the case. And I think that this measure with the conservation subdivisions, it's giving people who live in those areas a little more satisfaction knowing that the wild turkeys that were parading in their backyard will still have a habitat, and that it also is creating land around the wetlands so that it will help stormwater runoff, or at least in addition to the other measures that we have, will not be impacting those wetlands. And so I think it's just better environmental stewardship, and I think that everyone in Colonie should be thrilled about that.
That sounds good. I think a logical development from what we've done so far would be moving into green space, because green space is affecting everything everywhere, correct? Wolf Road, wherever you want to build, green space is involved.
Yes. Well, we have a requirement that any commercial development must have 35% green space, ground level. That can't be parking, it can't be building, it can't be gravel, it needs to be green. So one of the things we also heard in the comprehensive plan was we want more green spaces, and not necessarily in the front of Hannaford, who's going to go picnic there, who's, that's just kind of dead green space. So one thing we tried to figure out was, well, how can we get more open space in the town of Colonie and preserve natural spaces forever? And one of the mechanisms that we've come up with is called incentive zoning. And what this does is, if we have a project coming in and they're located in a certain part of the town and the zoning is correct and they can manage their stormwater and provide all the other buffers, they may ask the planning board for a reduction in their green space. And in return for that reduction of green space per a certain percentage, they would then pay into a dedicated fund called our amenity zoning fund. And what this fund does is, it's a standalone fund that goes towards the acquisition of open space in other parts of the town, maybe by the Mohawk River, maybe out in the Bout, or if the Pine Bush has a property that they're working for acquisition, and it's basically acquire it, set it aside, manage the stewardship of it, and it's taken care of forever. And we do that by decreasing the 35% green space requirement in parts of town where maybe it doesn't necessarily make sense to have the full 35% there, or they're redeveloping. And so Clifton Park has a similar measure that in its first year, I believe, they spent $1.2 million on open space acquisition. So it can be an incredible tool.
Can work.
Yeah.
And when you say 1.2 million, that could buy anything from a very tiny lot on Wolf Road to probably a fairly significant area of farmland, or
Right.
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 So that would make more sense to be able to spend that money where it makes the most impact.
Right. Right. And we are building out, but at the same time, there is an incredible amount of space left, but it is the constrained land that maybe isn't the most suited for development. And as we've been pushing our wildlife out of other areas of the town, we really need to start a more concerted, conservation program in Colonie.
And I think it's important too to stress that, even though we are looking at potentially a reduction in green space and intensification of development in some areas, that is in the context of our new design standards that much more closely regulate and specify how projects are put together, including the elements of the building treatments, the locations of the buildings,
The landscaping.
Landscaping internal to parking areas, buffers from parking lots to property lines, and so on. All those things still need to be met. We still need to look at whether there's adequate public infrastructure, whether it's highways, sewer, water capacity, to support the intensification of development. So ultimately it's the planning board who makes the final determination whether a given property can take advantage of that amenity provision.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think one might worry that, okay, well, if you let them build anything in exchange for some green space, you might do something that the people in the neighborhood wouldn't be very happy with in order to get the money for something. So that's good.
Yeah, it's a series of safe holds that are built into the system to protect the town and to protect the residents.
Now, as I recall in the comprehensive plan, people wanted more sidewalks, which are very expensive, and they wanted to be able to move, I think, from area to area easier, but then they don't want a lot of fast through traffic. Is there any way to move in that direction, to get people the ability to be on the street a little more without being competing with the cars?
Right, in danger. That's a really good question, and I think that's something that we struggle with, because they aren't compatible movements. The pedestrian and cars generally should be separated, and I think when you're talking about areas of Central Avenue, which of course has sidewalks, and parts of Route 7, that, fortunately that infrastructure is there, but in areas that we don't have sidewalks, such as Route 9, where you have the Sienna kids walking up Route 9 to get to Newton Plaza, and that's dangerous. It's not anything anyone wants to see, and something that we have in the upcoming year is to look at doing a town-wide sidewalk plan to figure out where it makes sense to have sidewalks and how can we start putting the sidewalks in, because another issue that comes into play here is that most of the roads that we would like to have sidewalks on are not town roads.
Oh.
They're county roads or they're state roads.
So there are issues with easement and
yes,
being able to put the sidewalk in.
yeah, where to put the sidewalks in. One idea is to have the developer put the sidewalks in when they bring their project in, but you can't have, 100-foot long strip of sidewalk in the middle of a block on Route 9. It's
And then
not going to
nothing.
work. Exactly.
Right.
And that's dangerous in of itself, that you're funneling people to this area. So it needs to be attacked from a more comprehensive level than we've got right now, and so that's definitely on our agenda for the next year. But the new land use law does promote, allowing for sidewalks where it does make sense to currently install them. So if you're adjacent to a property that has a sidewalk, you're likely to be asked to extend that sidewalk down further. So
I think that's a really great thing to hear, that we're going to have a plan for that, because it does sound very complicated.
well, and there are also a lot of other groups that are working on sidewalk and bike issues. We have the New York Bike Coalition. We have the Safe Routes to School group that are working to get children to be able to walk to school. Childhood obesity is coming into epidemic proportions in this country, and a lot of it is because children are not getting enough activity, and when they're being bused or dropped off at school when they live within a half mile.
Because it's not safe?
Exactly,
to walk.
exactly. It's not safe. So how do we make it safe for our children to get the exercise that their physical health demands? So these are all issues that...
There's an initiative at the state health department level also for promoting sidewalks as a means to promote better health.
active living.
Right.
Well, I think that's something that we see in Europe. We see, with a high density of population, you see people out on the street. And when you have enough people out on the street, it doesn't become dangerous. But
Correct.
I don't think people would want to send their child out by themselves these
No,
days,
no.
walking to school, even if it seems safe on the sidewalk.
Correct. And there are all sorts of programs, the Walking School Bus program and Walk Your Child to School Day, that, really I think the town needs to work more in concert with the school districts and parent groups to start working on this issue as well. But I have 3 small children, and we live half a mile from our elementary school, but yet the pickup is at the end of my street, which is a quarter of a mile from the school. And
So you've walked halfway before
exactly. You're halfway there. You
Up.
might as well keep going. But how do you make parents feel comfortable doing that? And I think that's something that will be an integral part of our, bike and pedestrian plan that we will start working on this year. So.
Now, maybe we don't have a lot of time left, and it's impossible to cover this whole plan. That you can see that the plan is something like 200 pages.
It's over 300.
Over 300, excuse me, pages long. It makes exciting reading, I can tell you, as I've prepared for the show.
That's kind of you.
Is there anything about Wolf Road that we could talk about? Because I know in the comprehensive plan we looked at Wolf Road and said, well, that's an interesting area because it already has some of the characteristics that we're trying to create in a small town. We have neighborhoods on the side, we have a park, we have hotels and shopping. How does that fit into the zones?
Well, the Wolf Road corridor is in 2 different zones. Part of it is in the H core, which is the highway, commercial, office, residential.
Okay, so
and
big box, et cetera.
Yep, that's where the mall is. Down by Colonie Center and those parcels up until Sand Creek?
From Sand Creek Road to
Yes.
Central Avenue. Only one side of Wolf Road, though. The Colonie Center side is the only side that's in the town's jurisdiction.
Right.
The opposite side is in the village of Colonie.
Okay, so that's not included?
The side opposite Colonie Center is not included in
Okay.
our jurisdiction. That's in the village.
That's the village.
Okay.
But everything north of Sand Creek is in the core, the
Okay.
commercial, office, residential.
Right.
And I think that, often the supervisor has been heard to mention that Wolf Road is our downtown. And one of the driving factors behind the core is to maybe have residential above shops or office and really start integrating a 24-hour community. And when you're talking about the Wolf Road area, which has Class A office space, wonderful retail amenities and restaurants and access to the crossings and the Rudy Saccotti Center, I mean, you're really talking about an area that has so much to offer. And I think that the new zoning offers Wolf Road that much more opportunity to maybe redevelop itself into something that's a little bit more and a little more active and vibrant than maybe where we're at right now, where it's a very 9 to 7 kind of place right now. And if we could make it more of that downtown where people live and work and play. And
Now, a lot of the houses there are gone. There's the Lietzo house, which is next to, across from the turf,
yes,
and that's about the only house left. So I guess when we think of
so.
housing, we think of off of Wolf Road,
right,
in the neighborhoods off the Kinlan Drive and
yes.
areas around there.
At least currently, but as parts of Wolf Road redevelop, there is the potential for mixed use and introduction of multifamily housing
Yeah.
along with the commercial uses.
Yeah. Second floor, third floor,
Okay.
that kind of thing. If you're thinking of, your traditional village, I went to school at SUNY Geneseo and lived above a bagel shop for a year and smelled fantastic that whole year. But it really is, it gives you that opportunity to pop downstairs, grab some coffee as you, maybe walk over to the state office to work.
And that's
down
the
at
nice thing
100
about the
Wolf
city.
Road.
If one ever is living in the city, you have all those things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things we were looking to do with these core areas, the mixed-use zones, was to increase intensity a little bit and allow for that more village feel so that you do have different housing opportunities and options. Not everybody wants to live in a 4-bedroom colonial, and it's difficult to find alternative housing stocks in Colonie. And that's something else that we heard throughout the comprehensive planning process is, well, what if I don't want to live in a 4-bedroom colonial? Where do I live? Do I belong in this town? And I think we're saying that, yes, there's room for you here, and we would like to provide you with opportunities to come enjoy everything that Colonie has to enjoy.
So you mentioned the sidewalks, that's coming. Anything else that we would look forward to in the next year?
Well, we do have our new director that's coming on next Monday, February 12th. Denise Sheehan will be assuming directorship of the planning department, and I think that out of our department you will start to see more brownfields revitalization programs. I know she's mentioned that in conversations and looking at what makes sense for maybe the First Prize Center, the Tobin packing plant.
Right, I think that's been an eyesore
Yes.
for a long time.
Yep, and so how can we develop that property in a way that makes sense for not just the property itself, but for West Albany and for the town as a whole that makes sense. So I think that will be on the agenda.
And that issue in general, the redevelopment of some of our less attractive, if you will, older industrial and commercial sites was definitely a part of the comprehensive plan, something we had on our list for implementation, and I think with Denise's interest, that probably will take a front burner. We also have some initiatives for development of gateways at key entry points to the town, say on Central Avenue, the Route 7 corridor.
Now, where would that be exactly? Where you actually enter Colonie or somewhere within?
It may be one or the other or both. I know one location that's been discussed as a possible gateway development would be, say, at the exit 6 from the Northway onto Route 7 as you head west. Another might be at the intersection of Albany Shaker Road and Route 7, where that's really a major entry point for people using the airport.
Right.
So it's an area of high visibility that we might use to give the town more of a unique identity.
Sounds good. Now, all this is on the website. We knew when we started out there was no chance to discuss everything. But your comprehensive plan is on the website, www.colonie.org, and
Yeah,
you
right
can
on the
click right
homepage.
on comprehensive plan and find your department, economic development, in there.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yes, we do.
This was a lot of job security in this plan, being able to come out of the gate strong and say, all right, let's get this land use law done, and everything else we do after that will really build on our work that we've done thus far.
Well, I want to thank you for being here, and I will be asking you to come back because there's a lot to talk about and a lot going on, and going forward there'll be other things to talk about. So,
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
having us.
us.
want to thank everybody for watching. Hope you have a great week and have a good day as well. Take care. Bye.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.